Good afternoon, Les.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the St. Louis Press Club's Hour in the Now series. I'm glad you could be with us today. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it. So the name is Les Landis, as you said, and I currently run and operate Landis and Associates, and it's mainly me and one other person and a bunch of folks that I bring in on a periodic basis for special needs. But the main thing that we do is help organizations improve culture and communication. That requires a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different approaches, a lot of different angles. And we do some things that are outside of that scope a little bit as well. We do some marketing and public relations. But the main thing is, how do we really create what I call high-performing cultures of trust, where people love to work and customers love doing business?
Trust is a big issue across the board in communications.
Yeah.
Real big issue. So today's August 21st. We're still in the middle of this pandemic. Numbers are still going up. People are still sick, and it's not a good time. So you have perhaps been doing some hand-holding among organizations internally?
Hand-holding, counseling, shoulder to cry on, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I've been doing quite a bit of that.
Yeah.
The thing is that when something like this happens, everybody gets flooded with, here's what you ought to do. And you get so many tips and ideas and directions. I mean, my email was so flooded with, here's how to deal with this kind of a situation. Here's how to communicate with customers. Here's how to communicate with employees, and so on and so on and so on. And so obviously I didn't ignore them. I mean, there's some good ideas in there. But I decided to kind of step back and provide what I called sort of a framework for communication during this particular situation, this particular crisis. And it had 4 components. One really focuses first on, in fact, I'm just gonna kind of look at my notes here. One focuses first on health and safety, which is really looking at containing the disease and reducing the risk of infection, all the stuff that goes along with that, and bringing people up to date on how things stand with their teams. The second one is connectedness, which is keeping people informed, aligned, and supported during the social distancing. Third one is compassion and appreciation, recognizing the difficulties people are facing and the special contributions they're making. And then the last one is hope and optimism, which is sharing information that can ease people's concerns and help them feel better about prospects for the future. So there are lots of different kinds of things we talk about with the employees and the client companies that I work with, but we try and use that framework as kind of a guide and put everything under those categories.
So that framework certainly is composed of preoccupations of management, non-management. You're addressing everyone.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. And what have been the tools that you have been using? Say, you're having meetings, yes,
correct,
with your clients.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about Zoom. Zoom gives you the capability of going into all these other little rooms if you want to. Have you taken advantage of those complementary aspects of the technology?
So I'm a techno boob, so I get about as basic as possible when I do it personally. And so I just use the basic Zoom platform most of the time. I've used WebEx. I don't want this to sound like a commercial for Zoom. There are other platforms out there that are good.
Thank you for saying that, because we've gotten so used to it, and it's almost like Kleenex.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my clients uses Microsoft Teams, and we do everything on Microsoft Teams with them. And not just for the communication that I conduct with the client, but for all of the communication that they conduct with their employees around the world. So as far as the, I'm not quite, can't remember the exact word, but all of the additional features and things that you can set up, I've actually participated in some of those things that other people have set up, where you can have breakout rooms and then you come back together again and talk about what you discussed in the breakout room. I've participated in that, but I haven't led it. For the most part, what I've been leading is pretty basic Zoom, which works most of the time, but I'll be doggone, I find that sometimes the features that even show up on Zoom are different. So I don't know, but I'm hanging in there and making it through.
Yeah. So let's go back a few months. So in March, I guess they're pretty much ushered out of their environments.
That's correct.
And so, you know, what was going on with you and your clients? Talk about that ushering out and, you know, pivoting, that pivot. Yeah.
Well, I'm not exactly sure what part of that pivot to focus on, but the first one is obvious. We stopped meeting face to face, right? That pretty much came to an end. And everything went to some kind of online communication, Zoom, WebEx, whatever. That's purely a logistical pivot. The other pivot that had to take place was really around content. What are we going to talk about now? And that's what actually led to the creation of this 4-part framework that I just got done talking with you about. And then the other piece was, I guess, something that you and I have talked about and dealt with for decades, and that is the level of transparency that you needed to have in the communication that you were going to have with people. I mean, you can have this 4-part framework, but are you just going to kind of gloss over the top of those things, or are you really going to drill down into the nitty-gritty and the core of what's going on in the organization in all 4 of those categories? Now, it kind of depends on the size of the organization, how far flung they are, what their culture is accustomed to in terms of transparency. But we had to grapple with all of those questions every time we decided that we were going to do some form of communication with the team. The other big thing was frequency. There's no what I would call true standard for frequency. Depends on what level you're at. Clearly, when you're talking about supervisor to employee, there's going to be a lot more frequency in the communication than there would be, say, between the CEO and everybody else in the organization globally. But we did try to make sure that we established a clear cadence of what kind of communication was going to happen at each level and how frequently that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So there are layers of communication then internally, yes?
Absolutely, yeah. Lots of layers. Yeah. And it's really, you know, there's been kind of a misconception for years, my personal and professional opinion, that employees really want to get all of their information from their supervisor. And that's true to a certain extent. That's really about what's going on day to day with our team, the work we're doing. But they just as passionately want to hear from the top people about the big picture. Where are we? Where are we going? What's the world look like for us? How are we responding to that? And so both layers are extremely important. And, you know, you could even look at layers that are in between, you know, between the immediate supervisor, depending on how hierarchical the organization is and how big it is. But yeah, each single layer really has to evaluate content, frequency, mode of communication. And another thing that's emerging in this I'll call it the COVID times, is that we've got to be very intentional about making sure that we're doing things that are giving people an opportunity just to kind of talk about what's going on with them. You know, how are you handling things? Are you running into any kind of challenges? Do we need to make some kind of an adjustment in the way that we're doing work and how we're evaluating performance under these conditions? Some people who've been performing extraordinarily well under normal circumstances are now performing quite poorly. We got to figure out how we're going to adjust our expectations for those people and continue to keep them engaged and aligned.
Interestingly, I guess you're maybe referring to that continuum of continuous improvement just went the other way. How you deal with that. But I'm thinking really you have no control over the external communications that people are hearing and listening to. I mean, there's this barrage of information.
Yeah.
That really does get in the way sometimes of the key messages I imagine you want to maintain in the internal organization, in the internal environment. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, actually, again, I keep going back to the 4-part framework. When we set this up, I said, we've got to do this because people are getting deluged with all kinds of input. So how do we make sure we've got a framework for what we're going to cover? And then one of the things I said, look, tell your teams in your communication that if they're looking for more information, let's say from a national perspective about how things are evolving, what's developing, what to do about certain circumstances, give them 1 or 2 sources. Maybe the CDC, give them that link and tell them, you're going to hear all kinds of stuff from all kinds of people and some of it is going to be a bunch of crap. If you really want to make sure that you're getting some consistent, reliable information, go to one of these 2 sources and nowhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And try and filter out the rest of the stuff that's coming in. Not that it's wrong or bad, but it's just too much. It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming and it takes some critical thinking skills.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So during COVID, of course, the overlay was George Floyd's murder. And so we have that to deal with because everybody has seen the images, you know, they're affected by this. And it's taking a community over, every community, in terms of the addressing institutional racism, systemic racism, addressing those. So how did you deal with that when all this came to be?
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. I personally have a considerable amount of passion over the issue. And I was really wowed by how some CEOs stepped up and really declared some extraordinary response to the situation, what they were going to do in their companies and establishing, you know, offices of diversity and inclusion, setting specific goals and standards and expectations. And I forwarded those to all of my clients with my own commentary about what do you think we ought to say? What do you think you ought to say to your team about how you're responding and what you're going to do about it? And it was interesting to see the various levels of response. And I actually even wrote some, I'll just call it, I don't want to call it announcements, but I wrote some descriptions, some letters from the CEO to the employees that I thought were important for them to send out. And they were modified depending on the type of business they were in and the kinds of employees they had. And I found that there was sympathy, but not any heroic response. Nobody really jumped on it and said, let's go out with this stuff whole hog. about the most that I saw people taking on was, let's make sure that in our team conversations that we let everybody know that there's no place for that kind of behavior in our company.
Speak
Well,
to that kind of behavior, would you please, when you say that kind of behavior?
well, anything that would suggest discrimination or racial insensitivity, any kind of behavior or words or actions that would imply that, there's no place for that in this company. But there was very little specific substance. There was very little clarity about accountability. There was very little in the way of process and trying to institutionalize something to address the issue. It was more like, you know, just remember the golden rule and apply that to everybody. And now let's go back to work.
So do you think that might, in the long term, be a benefit or hurt?
I don't think it's going to hurt. I just don't think it's really going to advance the cause of social justice very much. I mean, you know, I remember when this first came out with George Floyd, and I saw, I can't remember, it was one of the talk shows, I think it was, what's the talk show in the morning that has those 4 or 5 women that, and I can't even remember, I think Whoopi Goldberg is one of them.
Oh, The View?
The
No,
View, thank you. It's one of those programs. In any event, they were interviewing Mike Wallace, who is, you know, a reporter or newscaster or whatever with the Fox network. Now, of course, he's the son of Mike Wallace, and of course, his father was a pretty, I guess I would call him more of a liberal kind of leaning journalist, and Mike, I'm sorry, Chris, being on Fox, of course, which is considered generally a conservative news network, almost seems a little out of character. But I remember them asking him, and he was talking about how this has really, yet again, shown how systemically we're rooted in racism in this country, or racial injustice at the very least. And I remember one of them asking him, they asked, so Mike, do you think this time we're going to see some substantive systemic change? And his response was, well, I doubt it, because this is not the first time. We have seen this over and over and over again, and we've never been able to figure out how to really pick this thing up and be systemic in the way that we respond to it. But I will tell you something that touched me. Gosh, I think it was in, I don't know if it was in Biden's speech last night or whatever, but I think it was Biden. And the daughter of George Floyd, 6 years old, came up to him and said, you know, my daddy changed the world. And so all we can do is hope that something like that, and the good intentions and systemic methods for overcoming racism are going to take root this time. Maybe a little bit more than they have before, but it's not going to be a sea change, in my humble opinion. Just as an example that I gave you before about how my clients responded. Good-hearted, good intention, want to make sure this bad stuff doesn't happen, but it takes a lot more than that.
It's a good anecdote, really. Just again, a flavor for your clients and others probably as well. And we know this discussion is going to probably take over for a while. We hope, you know, with some changes, but your transparency issues and the trust, that framework you talk about is very important here, especially in a discussion like that, because that has to come out when people really want to talk about it.
Yeah.
really does. And if they have an atmosphere, an environment where they're free to do that, it sounds as if having a welcoming environment where people are open to receiving, what's on your mind and how can we fix it?
Well, yeah, let me kind of jump on that one because, as I mentioned before, my work is mainly improving organizational culture and communication.
Yeah.
And I've defined engagement and alignment as an emotional connection that employees feel for their work or for their organizations that get them tuned in, turned on, and eager to go above and beyond. Now, the only way to get people to go above and beyond is to make an emotional connection. Most people are going to be very responsible. They're going to do what's expected of them. They're going to be good performers, good workers, but that above and beyond requires an emotional connection. I think we go at that notion of trying to make an emotional connection in the wrong way. We do it with lots of things like perks and incentives and Pizza Fridays and Employee of the Month award, which is a terrible thing to do to a team. And on and on.
Trash.
Yeah, it's one-off activities that I call, sometimes they call it the program trap. Sometimes they call it icing on the cake. But you got to focus on the cake. And the cake really looks at what are the fundamental systems and processes that we have to change. Not only do we have to adjust the mindset and the specific ways that managers establish credibility one-on-one with their teams, but then also what's the design of the systems and the processes that people have to live with and work with every day that are really critically important. And if you do all of that kind of stuff right, and you also have a method for what I call constructive accountability, not punitive accountability, which is how it's usually applied, then people are already kind of in the mindset, prepared to deal with the kinds of things that we're dealing with right now. You don't have to figure out, oh gosh, how am I going to be more transparent now? Oh my gosh, how are we going to communicate better now? Because it's already woven and embedded deeply into the fundamental fiber and fabric and structure of the organization.
Mindset then is beliefs, yes?
Yeah.
A set of beliefs.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Mindset.
Yeah, in fact, interesting you use that word because sometimes people ask me, well, what's your definition of trust? And I say it's a belief. It's a belief that people will do the right thing in the right way at the right time. And if you believe that about somebody or some institution or some organization or some group, you're probably going to trust them. Now, how you get there, again, is with some management credibility factors, which begin with care and concern. Prove to me, first of all, that you're concerned about me and care for me, because if you can't do that, none of the others matter. Honesty and openness. Responsiveness, because you can be honest and open and caring, but if you're not responsive, nobody's going to trust you. Competent, you got to know what the heck you're doing. Prove that you know what you're doing and that you've got a team that knows what they're doing. Reliability, can I count on you to do what you say you're going to do? And then the last one is apology and accountability. How good are you as a manager at saying, you know what? I fell off here. That was my bad. Here's what we're going to do to fix it, and I need your help. Managers suck at that. And when they can do all of those things, especially the last one, their credibility is going to go up and the level of trust in the organization is going up. Now, you can train managers and get them all equipped and tuned in, turned in, mindset perfect, all that kind of stuff. But if you don't change the design of the systems and the processes, it's like going back and working with old tools that are so forcing you to do things in the wrong way. And those areas where I call people first systems and processes, and that means systems and processes that tell employees they are the number one priority of the organization. It's not the customer, it's not the shareholder, it's the employee, the one that has to live with this stuff and work with this stuff and deal with this stuff every single day. And there's 6 key things in that one as well. And the first one is measurement. What are you measuring? How are you doing that? The second one is recognition and appreciation. How are we doing that? Third one is communication. Fourth one is conflict resolution. How are we doing that? Fifth one is learning and development, systematic continuous learning and development, which is critical for all living beings. And the last one, which you already mentioned, is systematic continuous improvement. Now, when you got all those things in place in the way that tells people they count first and they count most, those are the perfect pillars then to move on to this other piece that I call constructive accountability. That says, you know what, we know you want to do a good job. Sometimes you fall off, and let's find a constructive way to get you back on track.
Mm-hmm. Well, what a wonderful tutorial on your field.
I got a little carried away there, I'm sorry.
No, because I think a lot of people will ask, what is organizational communication, for heaven's sakes?
Yeah.
And I guess there are different brands. You referred earlier to, well, I was hearing from, I don't know if these are publications you get information from. You probably have a host of resources, but you want to tell us a little bit about some of the resources that you refer to from time to time?
Well, let's see. At this point in my career, everything's pretty well formulated from research and work that I did years ago. Certainly the greatest influence on all of my work was a mentor by the name of Dr. David Berlow, who's really quite an extraordinary, he passed away many years ago, probably, gosh, I don't know, 25 years ago, something like that. Brilliant man, and in fact, my book is dedicated to him, my book called Getting to the Heart of Employee Engagement. And just about everything that I think, do, and say has some grounding in ideas that I got from him. Now, I continue to stay tuned in and aligned with organizations that I know are quite good. The American Society for Quality, Public Relations Society of America, Reagan Communication, International Association of Business Communicators, whole bunch of folks that I like the stuff that they send out, and occasionally I pick up ideas from it. But at this point, I've got my model pretty well formulated. And in fact, when it goes to organizational communication, I've got a model called Real Life, Real-Time Communication that has 7 major components at it with it. And, one is interaction. Another one is speed. Another one is availability of information, which is transparency. Another one is access to information. How do you get at it? Another one is relevance. Another one is inclusion. And the last one is authenticity. Mm-hmm. So I've got a booklet and an assessment tool that I developed around those 7 qualities and characteristics or elements of organizational communication.
Yeah, access is such a huge issue.
Huge. Because you know what? This is interesting. It's fascinating to see, well, you know what? We got nothing to hide around here. It's an open book, but I dare you to find it. Because the means for access is so critical. There's just so much information out there. If you don't have a structure for access, you can have all the policies for openness that you want. People are still going to be left in the dark.
If you had to talk about the St. Louis region,
yeah.
Is there anything particular or something that is a signature of how we do business here or how we operate? Is there anything that sticks out in your mind?
I don't think there's anything about St. Louis in particular that I would point to in terms of what I will call communication and I guess really examining the issues. I'm going to sound, this is nothing new that I'm about to tell you. The bottom line problem with this whole region is that we still can't find a way to get past this archaic concept of having one government in the county and one government in the city, and they can't really come together and resolve and align issues in a way that makes sense. We could be far more effective. We could be far less divisive. we could be far more cost efficient if we would get rid of the duplication of all of the services that we have across this region. I've dealt with a lot of governmental, non-governmental, nonprofit, and for-profit organizations that have been engaged in one major dialogue and retreat after another. The same things keep coming up, the same ideas keep coming up, and there's no will or skill for the execution of those ideas.
Wow. Let's end on a positive note. Wow.
So the positive note is that I really believe everybody wants to do the best thing, but who's going to give up their control? You know, who's going to give it up so that it can then become a much more cohesive and broader tent or umbrella or whatever the terminology is you want to use.
Well, that remains to be seen. So here we are, you know, you're looking to your future. COVID is still with us. We've got an election coming up, school starting, we've got education issues. There's a lot on people's minds. Maybe one last comment on what you predict with regard to your work. And
what do I predict in terms of what, Jessica? Give me a little more context.
What do you predict will be the time when people will probably feel more confident about their workplace and about, you know, about their preoccupations? When do you think those will maybe be mitigated?
You know, I really think it comes down to basics, right? When we have a vaccine and when we see that fewer people are testing positive and fewer people are dying, when we see that, I think people will slowly and gradually begin working back to what we've talked about as being normal. Now, you know, I do predict that there will be some long-term vestiges of this whole thing. I don't know when people are going to start shaking hands again. Is that going to be 1 year, 2 years? I mean, you know, the Japanese never have. It's a bow. You don't shake hands in that culture. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens culturally.
The other thing that I had, and this will be my last point to you, this notion, offices began to be open for more collegiality, whatever that is. And now, because of COVID, the walls are coming back up again. People are going back to work, but it's back to some of the old ways.
The old ways of what?
The old ways of separation.
So you're talking about the new old ways.
The new old ways.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the initial stages of COVID. Well, you know, I heard a very interesting comment from an economist who was being interviewed about what do we have to do to bring this economy back? And he said, you have to understand that economics really isn't about money or business development per se. It's about human behavior. And he said, as an economist, I'm speaking not as a doctor, not as a politician, but I'm speaking as an economist, that the one thing that we could do to reduce the fear that always keeps economies stuck is to have every single person wear a face covering. He says that's not a political statement. That's not a medical statement. That's an economic statement.
Wow, I'm so happy that you've been able to access so many different ideas for us today. This has been excellent, Russ. Thank you. Thank you for your time, and I wish you well. You seem to be doing okay with all this.
Yep, doing well, healthy. Business is still thriving, and you know, crossing my fingers and counting my blessings, and hopefully it'll continue that way.
On behalf of the St. Louis Press Club. Many thanks for your time, Les. And
My pleasure, Jessica.
be well.
You too. Bye.
Bye.